Thank you very much for coming, and thank you to our speakers, Jessica, Michael, and Irfan, for joining us tonight. It is great to see how many of you share our interest and enthusiasm for this topic. We've organized this talk tonight to shed some light into the developments of this hotly debated region of the world, which is so often misrepresented and misunderstood in the media. I'd like to introduce the society that organized this event, of which I am the chairman, who we are, our achievements of the last few years, our plans for the future, and what every one of you could do to help us. Delegations for Dialogue is a London-based international non-profit organization dedicated to promoting informed dialogue and open conversation on some of the world's most critical issues. Our areas of focus are generally places of conflict or undergoing transition. We also pay attention to areas that are generally misunderstood and misrepresented in mainstream media. Our SOAS chapter will be focusing on establishing a platform for open, informed, and engaged discussions through roundtable-style talks and curated travel programs to different parts of the world. We are hoping to establish further chapters in universities around the world, a process which we've already begun and which every one of you can get involved in, and I'll explain how a little bit later. Since 2015, we have organized nearly 20 programs and taken more than 150 students and academics to places like North and South Korea, Iraq, Kurdistan, Lebanon, Myanmar, as well as Moldova and Transnistria. Okay. For tonight, we also have a Twitter hashtag, EFD talk, which we would like everyone to use if you do involve in media or Facebook talks. Finally, if you are interested in helping us, the most important thing that you can do is show support. This is through interest in our society and social media and getting involved in our future events. We have a website on the SOAS Student Union website, which you can find. You can also find us on Delegations for Dialogue, SOAS chapter on Facebook and on Twitter. Finally, if I may finish with a quote from the poet Rumi to underline the spirit of our society. Raise your words, not your voice. It is rain that grows flowers, not thunder. I'll pass on to Siobhan now, who will introduce our speakers and moderate the discussion for tonight. Thank you very much.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for showing up and for being patient to give us wait as we wait for the room to fill up. Without further ado, my name is Siobhan Fazil. I am a graduate student of Middle East Politics at SOAS, and I will start by introducing our guests tonight in the order that they will be speaking. We will hope that each of them will have 15 to 20 minutes of 15 max actually to talk about what to give us the latest updates about their regions of focus and interest, and then we will follow up with question and answer. I'll start with Michael Stevens. He's a research fellow research fellow for Middle East Studies and head of Rusi Qatar at the Royal United Service Institute here in London since September 2010. From March to June 2017, Michael was seconded to the Foreign Commonwealth Office, or Foreign Affairs Department here in the UK, and he served as a senior research analyst for Syria and Lebanon. He also has 12 years of experience working in the Middle East and conducted rigorous research across many countries, including Turkey, the Levant, Iraq, and the Gulf states. His research has focused on Iraqi Kurdistan, the Kurdish region of Syria or Rojava, their social composition and responses to the threat from the Islamic State, Arab Shia identity across the Middle East, and the relationships with Iran, which includes the co-authoring of a Whitehall report. Whitehall is where the government of UK is based, focusing on regional response to Iran's nuclear program in 2014, and also a specialist in Gulf security or Gulf Cooperation Council. He's a frequent commentator on the Middle East affairs, and his writings appeared in many and he's a frequent commentator and his writings appeared in many media outlets. He's also regularly advised the Crown Prosecution Service on issues relating to national security. He has actually, Michael, I just realized that he done 2 masters, one in King's College here in London on Middle East affairs, and the other one in Israel, and he's proficient in Arabic and Hebrew. So please welcome to test his language skills as well. My next guest will be Irfan Aziz. Irfan has joined, as a PhD candidate, joined the School of Government and International Affairs at Durham University earlier this year. He's awarded the Al Sabah prestigious doctoral fellowship and become an interdisciplinary research team acting as a contributor to the British Arts, Humanities Rights Council and Open World Research Initiative. In his doctoral research, he will be investigating how ISIS, or how the so-called Islamic State, has shaped the Kurdistan region of Iraq and Turkey relations, and also relations vis-à-vis Iran. More broadly, his research aims to deepen the understanding of the role of non-state actors, our Kurdistan region, in the Middle East as a whole. Prior to his doctoral studies, Mr. Irfan has completed a Master's of Law at Kingston University in Arbitrary Law and Alternative Dispute Resolution. And my third guest will be Jessica Leyland, is the MENA Intelligence for AKE Group, a political and security risk consulting firm, having recently finished an MSc in the political economy of violence, conflict, and development, with a special focus on the drivers of conflict in Syria and in Iraq. I think, if I'm not wrong, Jessica is also a SOASIAN alumni. We call them SOASIAN. Jessica's thesis focused on the development of models of coercive control, and specifically the personality cult, which is familiar to many of us, sectarianization and the counter-terror rhetoric of the Assad regime and their application during the Syrian civil war. Jessica spent 7 years in the investment management industry, managing investment relations with the GCC sovereign wealth funds and the government organizations. She holds an MA in Arabic from the University of Edinburgh, and she has lived in Syria, Egypt, and Bahrain as well, and traveled extensively throughout the wider MENA region. Without further ado, Michael, the floor is yours.
I speak a tiny bit of Kurdish to go with that, so thanks Siobhan, and thanks to everyone for coming on a Friday evening. When I was a student, I would not have turned up on a Friday evening for a lecture, so you are far better than me, and your careers will probably be a lot more productive. I've been asked to talk about the Gulf, and clearly that has been dominated by one thing recently, which is the murder of Jamal Khashoggi and the ramifications of that for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. There have been an enormous amount of developments that have happened as a result of this, some of which were long in coming, and some of which I think would not have been possible were it for the, I think, calamitous decision of Mohammed bin Salman to behave in such a reckless way, and as a result of that, make the Western states, upon whom he is so reliant for security, but also for political economy, and for the success of Vision 2030, turn around and question not only the decision-making process in Saudi Arabia, but the value of the relationships which have existed through most of the 20th century, and particularly post-World War II. Of course, it's impossible to say what the long-term ramifications at this moment are. I think the pessimists among us would say that Saudi Arabia will continue as normal. The relationship, particularly in the defense sphere between the United Kingdom, France, the US, and Saudi Arabia, will go almost unaffected. But at that point, we have to start looking at the wider set of relationships and the wider expectations of what comes with a partnership with Saudi Arabia. And one of the things I think that has made people feel so vehemently angry with Mohammed bin Salman and the government of Saudi Arabia is not just how horrendous the death of Khashoggi was. It was that Mohammed bin Salman has been given every single opportunity to make his reform program work. He's been given access to the highest echelons of power in Paris, in London, in Berlin, in the United States. He's met with the Queen. He's not even a head of state. And everybody has shown him goodwill because there was a belief that what Mohammed bin Salman was doing, albeit in a slightly authoritarian fashion, was good for Saudi Arabia. It was good for the economy of Saudi Arabia. This would lead to a longer-term stability for the Saudi kingdom and stability in the wider region. And not only that, deal with some really troublesome aspects which have emerged from Saudi Arabia over the last 20 or 30 years, stemming from its education system. But not only that, giving young Saudis a pathway, some sort of hope that their careers may actually be like our careers in the West. They might have a job which is not just simply teaching religion or being in Aramco. They may be able to have their own startup businesses. They may be able to plot their own lives in a way that a top-down, centralized Saudi-run economy would not allow them to do previously, unless they had significant wasta, that's connections, or some source of power that allowed them to get into the House of Saud itself and get connections which would allow them to run their businesses and run their lives in a way that was actually, I think, creating a smaller and smaller elite who were alienating the population at large, most of whom are under 35. And you read various statistics about how many Saudis are under 35, it's around 60%. Mohammed bin Salman is 33, so the idea was that this is a young man who seems to get it, he seems to get what young people want, and he seems to be delivering on that front. The problem was, and I think that it started almost within a year and a half of him moving up the ladder, we saw the Qatar issue where a substantial set of decisions appeared almost overnight. And if you do this job, ladies and gentlemen, and you do want to specialize in the Gulf, beware, you're going to be woken up at 3 in the morning by pronouncements coming out of Riyadh or Doha or Abu Dhabi, because that's what always happens, and your phone's going to go all weekend. So for those of you who want to do this career, be prepared to have little sleep. So that was one of those moments, and there have been plenty in the last 3 weeks as well, where none of us got any sleep, because the Saudis love to release things at 3 in the morning. I don't know why they do this. I think it's something to get back at all of us for writing about them in negative ways. But nevertheless, I remember it broke at 4 in the morning that the blockade of Qatar had begun, and the first reaction from people in government here and in the United States was, what on earth is going on? We understood that Qatar's foreign policy was problematic, that it had backed some groups in Syria which people find distinctly unpalatable, that it had been hyperactive post the Arab Spring. But did it really deserve to have all of these measures put upon it? And what about the whacking great big US base, which was the center of all CENTCOM operations, not only in Iraq and the counter-Daesh campaign, but also Afghanistan? And so that shook people. And suddenly people started to think, hang on a second, what is the strategic goal here? What is the aim? Why have the Saudis escalated so quickly in a way that it doesn't look possible to back down from? We gave it a pass. Why? Because Qatar's kind of been a naughty boy. Okay, fine, fair enough. You know, there's been a couple of things where people would say Qatar has misbehaved. You know, we get it. It was an overreaction, but that's okay. And then we had the situation with the elite in Saudi Arabia being locked up in the Ritz-Carlton under the guise of corruption. Yes, many of these elite were corrupt. Absolutely. No one's questioning whether these people were corrupt or not. But if you want to create a climate that's permissive for business, it's good if you don't lock up all the people that own the businesses in the first place. That began a huge capital flight out of the country. FDI, foreign direct investment in the country, since that moment has dropped from $7.5 billion to less than $1 billion as a result of a lack of confidence in the business climate and the permissiveness of being able to do business. Again, you could rationalize it. You could say, okay, these people were corrupt, it's a popular move, and these people were, some of them, very senior princes who were a potential threat to Mohammed bin Salman. I can see why he would do it. It makes sense. Then came the Hariri affair, where all of a sudden the Prime Minister of Lebanon is phoned up and asked to come to Riyadh, and basically, at gunpoint, forced to read a speech announcing his resignation. At this point, everybody started to go, what the hell is going on? And that wasn't it. We had further persecutions of clerics, of female drivers pushing to drive. Saudi Arabia was very, very keen to point out that it had enabled a better and more active public space for women. And I had at RUSI a fantastic female member of the Majlis al-Shura, Hoda al-Halasi, come and speak about the frustrations of her life growing up in Saudi Arabia and the changes that were coming. Not all good, but the changes that were coming were broadly positive. But then it turns out that those people that had protested and not been awarded their freedom were to be locked up. clerics who opposed Mohammed bin Salman's foreign policy were to be locked up. And then there was a Twitter spat with Canada, which resulted in 16,000 Saudi students being ordered back 2 weeks before the term was about to start, because Saudi Arabia had got into a rumble with the Canadian government, and I was working a lot on that issue, about a tweet which criticised its human rights record. And we began to think, hang on, this is really starting to become a little bit extreme. Where and in what way will the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia realise that its behaviour is overstepping the mark, and its rise in regional politics is actually starting to look uncontrolled? And this is what's really interesting, is that since Mohammed bin Salman arrived on the scene, the Iranians have frequently said that this is a young man who doesn't have the experience and the wisdom of his father and his uncles, and is out of control. And it began to look like Iranian propaganda about Mohammed bin Salman might actually be right. And then we get the Khashoggi affair, which is beyond any realm of acceptable behaviour. In a consulate which is protected by the Vienna Convention, specifically because it is there for essential diplomatic work, a crime has been committed by the Saudi state. We can argue whether MBS was responsible for this or not. Frankly, who knows now? The investigation's going on a long time. But the point is this, is that this is a gross violation of international norms. And the backlash which has come has been completely unexpected by Mohammed bin Salman and by his advisors. And not only that, he seems to have lost a little bit of the trust of his father, who is now recalling senior princes, not all of whom I think are capable of taking on the slack. There's a lot of talk about Prince Ahmed coming back to Riyadh to help. But nevertheless, I think it's very clear that there is a shock to the system in Saudi Arabia. The backlash from what has happened as a result of Jamal Khashoggi's death has been beyond what anything Mohammed bin Salman had expected. But the conversations I'm usually part of are the following. What on earth was he thinking? What on earth were the Saudis thinking at a time in which Sergei Skripal had driven the United Kingdom to gather a number of states to bring sanctions against Russia, where there was an increasing sense that the rule and international order upon which all states govern their behaviours was breaking down. And somehow the Saudis must have either read that it was a permissive environment, or that somehow somebody wouldn't care. Well, actually, people do care. And a month later, we still care. I personally knew Jamal, and I'm still pretty upset about it, but at a policy level, the policy level which I work at, people are angry and frustrated, and they don't understand why it is that the Saudis have taken on themselves this position of regional sort of security arbiter, but then run with that excuse and behaved in ways which I think we're still trying to understand, but don't seem particularly rational or in their own national interest. And we can argue that some of this came from the Obama administration years, in which the Saudis felt isolated. They felt that the Americans and the West did not understand their concerns about the rising threat posed by Iran. And nobody is here giving Iran a free pass. Okay? Iran has, on the ground in Iraq, caused some very negative things to happen. Same in Syria. Hezbollah and Lebanon are not exactly the best friends that you'll ever meet. And of course the Houthi rebels in Yemen, which is another catastrophe, of course, that we can go into, clearly have support from Iran and have benefited from that over the last 2 years. But nevertheless, the ongoing tensions between Saudi Arabia and Iran are not a suitable excuse for the behaviour that we have seen from Riyadh. So the question is, what happens now? Well, there has been outrage, and clearly in the media there has been a concerted attempt to try and pressurise Saudi Arabia into admitting the truth, which it seems to be slowly doing after about 8 different iterations of explanations. Apparently he got into a punch-up, and then it was all, he slipped and fell, and now apparently we all seem to think that he was strangled the moment he walked in. Either way, I think it's the impact of that act is clear for all to see. It had been the case that the GCC had looked to Riyadh for some sort of leadership and guidance. The Qatar issue had clearly fractured the GCC, and it was already fracturing, but you now see interesting developments where countries like Oman and Kuwait are beginning to strengthen their relationships with players like Turkey. And of course, the person that's benefited a lot from this scenario is a person who is very, very known for his good treatment of journalists, which is Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Ankara. But nevertheless, one of the fascinating things is the intra-Sunni dynamic in the region. Recep Tayyip Erdogan has benefited from this in ways he could never have thought possible, and it's having regional implications. Qatar, of course, has built a very strong relationship with Turkey. Kuwait just last week hosted a military delegation in Kuwait City to talk about defense cooperation. These are two countries that border Saudi Arabia, GCC supposed allies, who are now looking for security guarantees far, far afield in the region. And then, of course, you have Iran itself, which is quietly looking on in amazement as its sworn enemy across the Gulf is busy shooting itself in the foot and looking for maximum benefit. Of course, the Iranians have sanctions which will come in force on the 4th of November. It's probably best for them not to stir the pot. But then again, those people that were pushing such a hawkish line against Iran tended to be people that were quite pro-Saudi Arabia as well. So where is that dynamic going to play? How strong is that dynamic playing out in Western capitals at the moment? And I think there is very, very clearly a shift in the way that people perceive Saudi interests as not necessarily being in the interests of the United Kingdom, as not necessarily being in the interests of the United States. And by the way, I do not fault Donald Trump for saying what he said about Saudi Arabia, because he's the only one in the whole game who's been honest about it. He's not honest about many things, but he's honest about the relationship, which is what? We make tons of money off them, and we have a security sharing relationship. Okay, do you know what? I have no problem with the honesty that comes with that. Because for the first time, what we have is not an American president, a la Obama, who talks about shared values and alliances and partnerships over decades. Actually, what the Khashoggi affair has revealed is that Western states and their interests with Saudi Arabia are primarily financial, secondarily security, and tertiary strategic. And the strategic element is fading. There's no doubt in my mind that Saudi Arabia's ability to engineer the region to its will has faded as a result of this crisis. It's going to have long-term impacts that we can't fully predict at this moment, and the prediction game is always a dangerous one because you invariably get it wrong. But nevertheless, there are two countries, I think, that are looking at this very, very closely right now. One is the UAE, who have hitched their wagon almost 100% behind Saudi Arabia, and are now looking at Big Brother and going, oh God, now everybody dislikes them, and we've just said how wonderful they are for the last 18 months, and what do we do? Does this have impact in the war in Yemen? Yes, absolutely it does, for both UAE and Saudi Arabia. It is very unlikely at a time in which Mohammed bin Salman is so wounded that he's going to make a concession in Yemen that would make it look like he was losing face. It is very unlikely that Mohammed bin Salman will make a concession to the other country I wanted to talk about, which is Qatar. This conflict between Saudi Arabia and Qatar, which has now been going on for, I think, 18 months almost, has divided the GCC in ways that we could never have fully expected. Qatar, for various reasons, primarily because it's spent money to buy friends, has survived, once again diminishing Saudi Arabia's projection of power. So you've got the custodian of the two holy mosques, the prime and most powerful Arab actor in the region, gravely wounded in terms of its perceptions, in terms of its power projection, and a prince right now who's learning a few tough lessons from his dad about how to be a statesman. Meanwhile, regional actors are moving, and Western actors are sitting there saying, okay, what does this mean for us? How do we maintain the relationship but make sure that this never happens again? And that's the key. Hopefully what we will get out of this is a learning process whereby Mohammed bin Salman realizes, and he will be king, I think. I don't, by the way, believe any of these things about princes taking him out or there being machinations within the royal family. I don't see a challenge coming. There's no power base inside the kingdom that could adequately challenge him. And I think from that perspective, we have to understand that the future king of Saudi Arabia is pretty damaged goods, and he's going to be for a long time. And I ask people when we talk about policy at the moment, they say, oh, when will brand MBS resurrect itself? I said, ask yourself a basic question. Would you want to be photographed shaking hands with MBS right now? And everybody looks down at their shoes. I said, when you tell me yes, that's when you know brand MBS is back. I said, do any of you buy a Nokia phone? iPhone, you probably got an iPhone, right? Who has a Nokia here? No one has a Nokia. Or you've got one person has a Nokia, right? But the point is, why? The branding for Nokia is gone. You don't want a Nokia. It does the same thing as this phone, right? But you don't buy one. And the point here is that brand MBS is busted. And they're going to have to work out how to fix it. Nokia didn't work out how to fix its brand, then it went. BlackBerry didn't either. Brand MBS, which is fundamentally tied up to all those reforms I talked about at the beginning of this presentation, is vital if the economic reforms are going to work. But it's busted. If you notice, those of you that look at the kingdom quickly, and I'll wrap up here, they've already revised down their economic diversification projections for 2020. As a result of this was already looking a little bit shaky in terms of their economy. But they've already now revised down their projections in 2020 on things like female labour employment levels, diversification away from oil and hydrocarbon sectors. And I think that's going to have grave implications for Vision 2030. And if that has grave implications for Vision 2030, then we need to be really worried. Because Saudi Arabia's population is not going to get any smaller anytime soon. Unemployment levels amongst people under 30 are rising rapidly. And a lot of people had hitched to this MBS wagon. This was the guy that was going to make it work. And now we're all looking at it and going, I don't want to be involved in this, right? Bill Gates just pulled out yesterday. A number of Richard Branson, you name companies now that are pulling out from doing business with Saudi Arabia. That's the companies that Saudi Arabia needs to make this work. So my view is, in the short term, okay, maybe you won't see the kind of changes that you thought, right? Defense contracts will still go on. There'll still be planes bombing Yemen. The Qatar issue is still going to go on. But it's the 10 to 15 year mark that we need to be worried about. And I think the Khashoggi affair is going to play out in ways that Mohammed bin Salman didn't expect. And while he may not leave office now, he's got grave challenges 5 to 10, 15 years in the future. So I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. I think with the brand MBS gone, I think Thomas Friedman will have a very hard night to sleep and needs to find out what's his next column going to be about. So with that note, I'm going to ask my next speaker, Mr. Aziz, to provide us an update from Iraq and the Kurdistan region, and to explain to us, or to explain to the audience, what were the main drivers that pushed the Kurds to have a referendum last year, and to also tell us and bring us up to date to the latest dynamics in Iraq vis-a-vis the regional countries, especially Iran, Turkey, and the Gulf.
Thank you, Shrav. Thank you for coming. As Shaban said, I will focus on the Kurdistan region and Iraq. And the Kurds are around 40 million who have been divided between 4 countries, Iraq, Iran, Turkey, and Syria. Today I will focus on the Iraqi Kurdistan, which is known Kurdistan Regional Government. So the Kurdistan Regional Government in 1991 had been freedom, and 2003 when Saddam Hussein fell, they got autonomy, and 2005 they been federal, as a federal region government. So the Kurdistan Regional Government, they hold the referendum last year in 25th of September, and I will talk about what was the reaction from the neighbors and the GCC states, and then the great powers in the region, and then what happened after referendum. So the Baghdad relation with the Kurdistan regional government, especially after Saddam Hussein 2003, the Kurds with many hopes went back to Baghdad, and they want to create a new Iraq and develop the peaceful and democracy. But after 2007 and 8, the Kurds lost many hopes, because in 2005 they created new constitution, and Kurds tried to get their right in the constitution, but most of the problems coming after 2007 and 2000, especially 2013, when ISIS came to attack Iraq, and 2014 they cut budget share with Kurdistan, the budget share budget from central government. The central government cut the Kurdistan budget, and they didn't send the budget, and then the other problems coming. That's why Kurdish regional government leaders try to have their own idea, which is going to hold a referendum. And in 2014, Kurd asked the parliament to prepare for the referendum, and the United States said because of our Islamic State, our responsibility, we should defeat ISIS. So they stopped this agenda, and they were trying to defeat ISIS, and they destroyed ISIS in 2014 and 2016. Yeah, in 16 again, Kurd asked, and United States and the UK again said, we are not going to support this project because we want to be Iraq as a stability and be unity. And then in 2017, as I mentioned, they hold a referendum, but the reaction coming from the neighbors, especially Turkey and Iran, and Turkey at the beginning said we don't have any problem with the Kurdistan regional government for referendum, and Iraq the same. In President Barzani, he visited Baghdad. The Abadi said we don't have any problem, and he signed the letter to cover the Iraqi Kurdistan budget to sell the Kirkuk oil to Turkey and to Turkey sell to the EU countries. They covered this all of problems. Then what? After that, Iran invite Turkey, and Iran was the main problem to stop Kurdistan regional government independence, and they invited President Erdogan, and after that, Erdogan changed his mind. I mean, the strategy for the Turkish has been changed. They said we're going to have reaction against Kurdistan referendum, going to block the borders, and Iraq blocked the international flight as well. So it meant that Iran had effect on the Iraq and Turkey as well, because as I mentioned, both of countries at the beginning they said we don't have any problem. Turkey said this is the problem, internal problem, that problem should be sorted out, this issue should be sorted out between Baghdad and Erbil. And Baghdad, as I said, they said we don't have any problem, and they let the Kurdistan regional government to sell the Kirkuk oil and get the economic independence. So the reaction from the GCC, the Kurdistan regional government do not have the relation between Kurdistan regional government and GCC is very limited. But Saudi Arabia and Emirati was silent, and they do not have any formal reaction. Most of the people are in social media, they are supporting Kurdistan independence and referendum. So, but Bahrain said that Kurdistan should not be in rush for this process. They should wait, and in future may they have their plan to sort out the problem by negotiation. So, but Qatar was taking the strongest position in GCC states against Kurdistan. They said it shouldn't be, and Iraq should stop in this process, and they should use their army. It seems which the country close to Iran in GCC, they the same idea, and they against Kurdistan regional government to get independence. So the United States, as I said at the beginning, they said the responsibility for us now, we have to destroy ISIS, and the UK said we believe that the Kurdistan regional government and the central government Baghdad, they should sort out their problem by dialogue. And then Russia and Israel have different response to Kurdistan regional government referendum. And Russia said we believe that Kurd should get their right, and we and Israel said we support to Kurdistan regional government get independence and establish the state. So, but after that, when they hold the referendum in 25th of September 2017, in October, Iraq used army and they attacked Kurdish Peshmerga 16th of October in Kirkuk and this area, which under the Article 140. And then the clash happened between Kurdish Peshmerga and Iraqi army, PMF, Hashd al-Sha'bi and Iranian militia. And they controlled the city. Unfortunately, Kurdish Peshmerga was not united. One of the parties, it's called PUK, and Talabani family, one of his son, he had agreement with the Qasim Soleimani general. He's the Iranian general in this area. He in charge most of the Iranian militia back in Iraq, Syria, Libya, and Yemen, Bahrain. And they had agreement, as he said in the TV, he said most of leadership from his party support this idea to withdraw Peshmerga, withdraw from Kirkuk and let the Iraqi army to control Kirkuk. They said we don't want to fight, and Iraqi army more stronger than Kurdish Peshmerga. And personally, I don't believe that, because we destroyed ISIS, and the Kurdish Peshmerga are so strong. I'm not saying that because of I'm Kurdish, but Donald Trump say that, and Obama say that. Most of the leaders around the world say that. And and one thing is, it was important that time Russia did the agreement, the Rosneft did the agreement with the Kurdistan regional government to buy the oil and gas from Kirkuk. It was a good message to support KRG and to say still Kirkuk is a Kurdistan. And the Russia was one of the regional powerful in the region, said Kirkuk is still Kurdistan and we support Kurdistan regional government. We're going to sign the agreement to in the future to buy gas and oil from this city. So I think most of the political analysts say that was a big problem for KRG, especially the United Kingdom get upset about that. They weren't happy when they saw Russia had agreement with KRG to buy Kirkuk in there, because United Kingdom thought they are the Kirkukers for them, because in past they were in power. I'm talking about 1921. The UK were very strong in this area, and they said Iraq is for us. No one else should come to take oil or have power in this region. But now is relationship. After 6 months before, the relationship between Kurdistan regional government and Baghdad getting better. And in May last year, the Iraq hold their election and for the parliament, and they create a new government. They have new prime minister, new president. The prime minister is from Shia, and the president Kurd, and the parliament speaker is the Sunni. And they promised, as usual in past, they promised as well. Personally, I said I don't believe Iraq will get stability, because it's right, there is Sunni in power and Kurd in power, but if you look inside the Iraq, you cannot believe that they can work together, because already around 3 million Sunni outside of Iraq, and the government couldn't do anything for them to let them to come back their homeland and to stay at their home. So that's why, and Kurds are not happy as well with the Iraqi government. They tried with the Shia and tried with the Sunni. Both of them was not helpful to work together in the central government. So Kurdistan regional government held the election as well in September, and they are trying now to create a new government and to have new prime minister and new president as well. As I believe the relationship Kurdistan with the West countries as well, neighbors getting better, and they are working hard on this. Yeah. Okay, thank you. So, as I said, the problem is we can't see it in the map. The Iraq, okay, we can't see this is the map of the Iraq, but inside there's a lot of problems. ISIS now has come back as well. They are active, and they said we destroyed, but unfortunately we can't see every day. They are active in Kirkuk area, in especially Sunni area, and the government could not stop them. And that's the ISIS in there, as I said, other nations is not happy. That's why I'm not pessimistic to say, oh, Iraq never become stability, but this is the reality. And if we say it, as I believe, United States and West countries most of the time say Iraq should be stability and will get stability, and it will be that there should be unity, but it shouldn't. But I don't think so, because as I see, there's a lot of problem with the Kurd, problem with the Sunni, Shia, and Iran have very hard influence in Iraq, and after Saddam Hussein, Iran of the only Iran get benefit from Iraq. No Shia, no Kurd, no Sunnis, no Turkey or other regional power. Only Iran is. They created their own army, as I said, Hashd al-Sha'bi, and that Hashd al-Sha'bi is stronger than Iraqi federal army. So, which is more dangerous in the future, as I believe, if the West cannot stop Iran in Iraq, it will be more dangerous than North Korea, because they already control 5 Arab countries, and the GCC had not any reaction to them. And I met most of the GCC leaders, country leaders. I asked them, they said, we are waiting for West to give us help and to stop Iran. So and West still do not have any reaction to stop Iran influence in this area. So now United States tried to stop them, but as I believe Iran always one step forward of that regional power who are in Middle East now.
Well, thank you very much. There is a lot of food for thought. We can think about it. Thank you. Without any stop, we're going to Jessica, who she will be focusing on what the current state of territorial control in civil war in Syria means for regional allegiances, and how Iranian and Russian influence in Syria will affect the balance of power, especially over cross-border ties with neighboring countries such as Lebanon, Hezbollah role of security and climate there. And we've also seen in actually as early as this week, where we had for the first time a trilateral, or I don't know, 5 countries meeting, but there was no UK and US to be seen. And that's actually a slightly bigger and more maybe accommodating meeting than Astana version, where even France and Germany are not on the meeting table. So the floor is yours.
Yes, thanks very much, everyone, and thank you for having me. It actually feels like just yesterday that I was sitting where you guys are now, so it's interesting to be back. And so I'm going to do a brief chat about Syria and the kind of details in the run-up to the demilitarized zone that's been kind of been prepared but not really been kind of effective yet. And then I'm going to talk about potential projections for Syria and the kind of power struggles that are kind of ongoing in the country. So I'm sure all of you know that the war that has devastated this incredible country has killed an estimated kind of almost 500,000 people, displaced about 12 million, injured obviously more than 1 million, and that's not even mentioning the people that have gone missing, that have been taken by the regime and other forces in the country. It's too difficult to count those numbers. In 2015, it was very much thought that the regime had kind of expended its energy, had really kind of lost its power in the region, and there was a lot of hope for a rebel victory. Unfortunately, in about October, unfortunately for the rebel movement, Iran, Hezbollah and Russian forces came in and provided ground support and air support from the Russian side to the regime forces, which up to this point then has allowed the regime and its backing to retake most of the area in Syria. There are obviously different parts of the country that are still under different parts of control. You've still got the Syrian Democratic Forces fighting ISIS out in Hajin to the east. You've got the Kurdish People Protections Unit who are who are in Manbij. And you've got Turkey, who's occupied Afrin and pushed out the Kurdish forces there. You've also got, as I mentioned, Hezbollah, the Russian forces, and Iranian forces on the ground throughout western Syria. So this year, the rebel-held enclave of Ghouta was taken by the forces and Russian police. You've had the city of Daraa, which was also taken. And obviously now we're left, all of the kind of rebel forces were pushed up into Idlib, kind of very strategic location bordering Turkey. And there are an estimated 70,000 rebel fighters in and around Idlib province. Also, Idlib province is strategic for the Assad regime as it borders Latakia province, which is the kind of ancestral home of the Assad family, and so it's quite symbolic from that region. So to talk a little bit now about the demilitarized zone. In the run-up to the 17th of September, which was the date of the agreement between Putin and Erdogan, there was a huge barrage of military bombardment against Idlib, which pushed a hell of a lot more people out and was gearing up towards an unprecedented human catastrophe, which is what the UN called it. So this deal, the demilitarized deal, was ostensibly to prevent this catastrophe. So the deal is basically a demilitarized buffer zone between government and rebel fighters that runs about 15 to 20 kilometers into rebel territory. On the 10th of October, all rebels labelled as radicals were due to be evacuated from the zone. And on the 15th of October, all heavy military and weapons were due to be evacuated as well. Both of these deadlines have obviously passed, and ostensibly the 10th of October deadline, in which the rebels were due to evacuate the zone, or many of the groups, actually, was adhered to, but nobody actually really knows whether it has been adhered to, and there is still apparently heavy weaponry in the demilitarized zone. Now, Russia and Turkey have said, right, let's extend this. But the extension dates are as yet unknown. We don't really know what that means, and we don't really know how the demilitarized zone is yet going to be enforced. You've got Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, who are based in Idlib and in the zone, who apparently still have weaponry there. And I mean, they seem to have got rid of a lot of their weaponry, but I'm just worried that it's actually been pushed back into Idlib and kind of other places that might give the Assad regime more of a reason to bombard Idlib. So we've got a little bit of progress, it seems. Turkey's working to convince HTS to agree the demilitarized part. They're going to clear the M4 and M5 highways up into Turkey and down and further into Syria of HTS checkpoints, and they're going to patrol those borders in parts alongside with Russia. Now, so where the power sits now, so you've got Russian military bases in Latakia, a naval base in Tartus, and I don't know whether you remember a lot of news coming out of the, for example, the Balkans and the Mediterranean. There were lots of reports that massive Russian naval capability was gearing up on the border by Cyprus and just off the coast of Syria in the Med. So that is actually still there. Russia ostensibly, they've got forces, as I said, in Latakia, in Tartus, and they've got their forces scattered throughout the western half of the country. Now, ostensibly, they want a peace deal with the moderate rebels, in which part Assad would regain all of the territory apart from Idlib, which would remain rebel-held, and then there would be negotiations as to kind of a decentralized zone there. That would lend Russia's presence legitimacy, because it would need to moderate that, but it doesn't have any interest in confronting Turkey. So basically, Russia's trying to prevent an all-out barrage of Idlib, which is great, But then you've got Iran, who are also around the west of Syria. They're rubbing up against the Golan Heights and really pissing Israel off. You've seen quite a few there's repeated attacks on Hezbollah and Iranian forces and supposedly Syrian regime forces from Israel in the country. And we all know what happened when Syrian forces tried to, actually shot down a Russian jet. So that was a bit touch and go for a minute. So you've got kind of these areas of control of Iran. You've got Turkey up in the north, who are manning a series of observation points around Idlib. They're patrolling the DMZ when it's finally coming into force, and the patrol should be starting kind of around about now. They're occupying Afrin following their invasion in January, and they're working to resettle refugees in the area that's been deserted by Kurdish, who are the kind of normal inhabitants of that area. And they've started patrols with US forces as of today to patrol Manbij, which is another YPJ kind of hold in northern Syria. What they seem to be doing is creating a buffer zone in northern Syria that will allow, I kind of feel like, a deconstruction of Kurdish power. We've just heard about the referendum, and that obviously set Kurdistan succession aspirations back quite a lot, and by taking out and splitting up Kurdish forces in Rojava that they claimed back from ISIS in the fighting, they are essentially breaking up this power that seems to have developed quite a lot over the last few years in reaction to ISIS. And then you've got the USA in the region. So they're fighting Islamic State and backing the Syrian Defense Forces in Hajin. They're providing primarily air support, but what we've seen in the last few days is that Turkey has actually started bombing YPJ or SDF positions in the east of the country around Deir ez-Zor to kill off the Kurdish threat that they say is a terrorist threat. So you've got the US supporting the SDF and the Turkish bombing it, although the Turkish and the US are working together in the north. So that's kind of where we are on the ground, which is quite an interesting kind of power play. So I wanted to actually think a little bit about where this takes, powers in Syria in terms of reconstruction. The World Bank and the UN have estimated between 200 billion to about 400 billion needed to reconstruct it. So I think it was last year or the year before, there was fundraising in which Friends of Syria coalition, which include the US, Canada, and the UK, managed to raise about 10 billions worth of aid. This has now been frozen as Assad has managed to reclaim most of the territory. Now, the reason this is frozen is because they do not want to negotiate with Assad. That's all very well and good, and I can understand that they wouldn't want to talk to him. However, what we've now got is Russia, who is threatening to rebuild Syria like it did Europe after World War II. If anyone's spent any time in Damascus, you can already see the Russian presence in these kind of low-slung, kind of 1970s kind of concrete buildings. So Moscow feels a little bit insecure in its position there. If it manages to maintain the zone, then fantastic. If it doesn't, which I personally don't think it will, because it's kind of looking like the Assad regime does want to continue with territorial reclamation and really retake Idlib. So it's feeling a bit insecure, so this reconstruction will allow it to kind of cement more of its presence in the region, and as we've just heard, you've got Rosneft in Kurdistan, and so it's kind of going to bring around a bigger foothold there if it starts the reconstruction. So you've got Jordan and Lebanon, who really do have to engage, sadly, with the regime. The war has taken a massive toll on both economies, and they need to be able to resettle the refugees somewhere. I mean, Lebanon's population has really swollen through refugees in the last few years, as has Jordan, and we know that Jordan's previously, well, both countries have previously taken a lot of energy to support, sadly, the diasporic Palestinian situation as well, which both sides are causing issues there. So you've got Russia, you've got Jordan and Lebanon, you've got the UK and the West who have taken themselves out of it, and then you've got Iran. So Syria for Iran would be another very strategic foothold. You've got the proximity to Israel, which Israel's very unhappy about. You've also got the kind of the gateway into Lebanon and Hezbollah. And although Iran has expended a hell of a lot of money in the Syrian civil war at a time when it really can't afford to be doing it, it will continue to maintain, I believe, and try and expand its power by, well, at the moment the Syrian regime is issuing permits to Iranian construction agencies to bulldoze those houses that it deems to have been either opposition, or if the people there have fled, they've said, oh, if you've been gone for such and such a time, you no longer own your house. So it's the licenses they're giving out are basically just a way to expropriate and demolish property to allow the rebuilding of support base for the Assad regime in a model that it itself wants. So you've got all these opposing parties, and one thing to think about also is China's influence. So the Chinese have actually earmarked construction money for Syria under the Belt and Road project. It's also working closely with Iran, as Iran's turning east to find other economic sources. China's poised to take over the South Pars oil field that Total left in August, and poised to take over a lot of the Western vacuum in business that Iran has seen since the reimposition of sanctions. So you've got Russia, Iran, Lebanon, Jordan, China coming in, and China's probably got the most money out of all of them, and they will just do what they've been licensed to do. They will get the government contracts the regime contracts, and that's looking like that's kind of getting worse and worse, and just being able to consolidate regime power in the region. So Russia wants to arrange a deal with the rebels where Assad could remain in power but not give Idlib back to Assad. Iran has Hezbollah. They wouldn't mind if they'd prefer it, I suppose, if Idlib and the de-escalation zone didn't work. You've got Turkey, who are trying to maintain the buffer zone in the north, and they want to keep the Kurds out of Afrin and preferably out of Manbij, preferably out of Syria, full stop. But so they're bombing positions there while working with the US, who are also backing the Kurds. You've got, and then you've got Idlib. So you've got Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, who are an al-Qaeda-backed group who ostensibly are trying to fight to free Syria from the clutches of the regime. Now, although they're militant groups, it's very difficult to kind of separate, these kind of the citizens on the ground who are very threatened. You've got no ability to import or export real food or resources, and these groups have taken hold in Idlib, and I would love to believe that the demilitarized zone works. I would love to believe that it would hold, and we mentioned earlier this kind of UN. Well, we've mentioned that Putin, Macron, Erdogan, Merkel got together for a Syria summit a few days ago and said, look guys, we'd love to resettle the refugees, we'd love safe passage for everyone in Idlib, and we don't want any secession or kind of separatist ideals. Yet, as I said, they are refusing to engage with Assad. So what really needs to happen at this juncture, because you can see on the ground the power that has really been consolidated over the last year. I think if they're going to affect any change at all, and they are looking towards a democratic process that God knows how long that could take, they do sadly probably need to have to engage with Assad, if only to purely prevent the reconstruction processes of all the other actors in the region, allowing this consolidation that will lead to a singularly homogenous Syria under Assad again, in which dissenting voices will still be stifled and will only allow potentially for the rise of more militant Islam. And as we said, ISIS have grown a foothold. They declared 2 more wilaya this year, 2 more states. The disputed territories in Iraq, I know they've started to create nodes in. So I'd like to say that Western governments really do have to start, coming to the table and sadly having to negotiate with this despotic tyrant. So, thank you.
Well, I am mindful that I have confined Michael to only speak about the Gulf, but he's also an Iraq and Kurdistan region expert, and actually this is how I first met him in a Kurdish conference in Erbil. So would you like to say something about the prospects in Iraq, and especially with what we have heard that ISIS is starting to come back more often, making hit and run attacks, and also the prospect of the 2 governments in Iraq, in Baghdad, and also in the Kurdistan region to work together? How do you see the prospect the way forward?
There's a lot of moving parts to that. Firstly, I think that the ISIS question, the appetite, actually the US has shown a better appetite than we had previously expected in terms of its thinking about how long it needs to be there in order to deal with the ISIS threat. And that's something that many times in the UK we sort of talked to the US and said, listen, this is something that's not going away. This is almost a generational issue that we're going to be facing. And it seems to me that there is an understanding of that, and what you have, north of the Euphrates in Syria, and also at the Assad base in Al-Qaim in western Iraq is quite a substantial US military presence, and I don't think that's going. Like, you're talking combined maybe 3,000 US troops able to move pretty quickly and snuff out anything that they would see either in Anbar or around Al Bukamal in the Far East in Syria. Do I think that we're going to have a long and sustained problem from Daesh? Yeah. Look, the problem that you've got is that the Iraqi security forces, who did 2 sweeps in the last couple of months, did a really bad job. And telling people, like telegraphing that you're coming when you're coming kind of after them is really bad idea if you want to kill them. So it was a bit of a mess, and the operations have not been successful. And Daesh in that area, particularly around the Hamrin Mountains, are able to sort of disappear at night. I term this the mosquito strategy, which is that in the daytime they disappear, and then at nighttime they come out, annoy the hell out of everyone. Bother them, and no one seems to know what to do, because the more you kill, the more seem to come back. And they seem to have been doing very well with this, and their confidence is growing to the point where you actually now see some of them in the daytime. You've seen around sort of Dakok and southeast of Kirkuk, they have now come into mosques in the middle of the day and said, you're paying for our food, by the way. Oh, and this mosque, yeah, we're having that. Don't tell anyone that we're here or we'll kill you. And they're getting bolder and bolder, and that is a problem, and that's been acknowledged. The problem that you've got, of course, is that at the political level, when it comes to decision making, Brexit here, and you've got midterms over with the caravan and the southern border and all this. Look, policymakers, God bless them, don't have a lot of spare time to think about these things at the moment. So it's sort of like putting a band-aid on an open wound. You can deal with it, but you can't solve the problem because the political time and I would not say willpower, because there is good development work happening in Iraq. But with this new government, I think we're in a place where I don't know what your opinion is, but I can't quite see how the new arrangement of ministers is going to make anything more stable in the short term. The next problem you've got, of course, is facilities and services in Iraq, which are leading to not just Sunni areas feeling pretty angry, but Shia areas are pretty upset as well. And this electricity problem is critical. Come June, temperatures are going to get up to 50 degrees again. And do you know what? Any Iraqi that goes out to the streets, absolutely, we've all been in Iraq in the summer and it is boiling hot and it's really uncomfortable. And these poor guys and girls, drinking muddy water, no electricity, they want something better. They deserve something better from their government. And it's not just the case that, Sunni areas have been badly treated or Kurdish. Actually, there is an issue of legitimacy with the entire central system at the moment. The Muhassasa system, how would you translate that?
Consensus.
Yeah, consensus system where every political party at the top gets their little bit of a share. They all spread the load out. Now that's mitigated to some point by higher oil prices at the moment. Yes, you'll get a little bit of reconstruction money flowing down, but again, there's an issue of corruption here. Governance in Iraq is, I'm afraid to say, and you guys lived it longer than I ever did, there's a lot of work to be done. It's great that we've got consensus candidates for the president and the prime minister, fantastic, but there are other issues here. So we talk about the electricity issue. Iran supplies a huge amount of gas to the power plants in Iraq, right? So, they're making billions of dollars from this. We've got sanctions coming in pretty soon on November 4th, which is going to affect this dynamic. So if we want to talk about how to deal with Iran or the stability of Iran's power in the region, and because of Iranian power you get a response from Sunnis or Daesh, I'm afraid to say I don't think anyone's got that luxury right now. The political machinations that go on, but as they sort of play out on the ground, it's very difficult. I think of it from a sort of Western policy point of view. For us to help is really tough because there's such a shortfall in terms of things people want and things people need, and the connection then to political stability that you get from that you're sort of going, where on earth do we start? Now, I think the big thing that we have to talk about quickly about the Kurdistan region is Kirkuk and the oil. That, frankly, there are some Shia militias who are trucking Kirkuk oil east and they're making money off of it, and Iran is benefiting. The US have put a huge amount of pressure on both Baghdad and the Kurds to try and work out an export route back through the pipeline, and you mentioned the pipeline, out to Turkey so that you can get, 400,000 barrels a day going from Kirkuk out west in a way that doesn't benefit Iran. But Erbil and Baghdad are going to come to some sort of agreement about who's going to get paid. At the end of the day, this is a privately owned pipeline. You have to pay to use it. And unfortunately, Baghdad is still kind of slightly in Saddam mode where everything should be socialized and free and everything, and they don't quite get this notion that it's not their pipeline, so they kind of have to pay to use it. And here I actually do, see the Kurdish point of view, because frankly, it's going through their territory, it's their pipeline, partly owned by other players, but they should get paid. And what they're asking for is not a very high percentage of total money flowing, right? So the Iraqi central government, by screwing up on this point, has lost $8 billion over the last year. $8 billion. $8 billion that could have gone to electricity generation, that could have gone to providing clean water for people. And then you took on top of that, and you talk about things like Daesh, and you talk about things like militiaization in the south. It's a difficult one. And I'm not trying to say that I don't have any hope. Actually, of all the regions, actually Iraq's one of the places where I'm a little bit more hopeful, but it's just reality. If you want to combat Daesh, you have to think about all these other things as well. And it's not just in isolation. Otherwise, you've got planes that are controlling the skies and killing people, which is what they're there to do, right? And the problem just multiplies the next week. So that's my sort of, unfortunately, slightly depressing analysis.
Well, thank you. And also not to mention that Iraq still needs to reconstruct a third of the country in the wake of the defeat of ISIS. Well, if Jessica and Irfan, if you don't have any points to share, especially what I was, correct me if I'm wrong, but I have not heard any reactions from Russia, especially Putin, on the Khashoggi crisis. What is the deal with that? Because I know that at least he has met Crown Prince last year, or actually earlier this summer, when Saudi was playing in World Cup and they were beaten hardly. So, yeah. Would you like to say something about that? Like, what is the relationship between Russia and Saudi Arabia, or actually why there has not been any reactions? Are they hoping to get something to play some role in the privatization in Saudi Arabia?
If you look at the Future Investment Initiative conference that occurred last week, from which HSBC, Jamie Dimon from JP Morgan Chase, all of these big players dropped out, or at least refused to speak. Now, it's ironic that you mentioned Saad Hariri, because he was sitting next to MBS on the stage a year after he was forced to resign and kidnapped. Russia, I suppose, will look to pick up any slack that comes through. I mean, you saw with the Skripal affair, they're not worried about this stuff. This doesn't upset them. They don't care. It's more money in their pockets. And to have a bilateral tie with Saudi Arabia, which these ties are fraying between the US and Saudi, and then to see ties, from Russia, for the money to come in and like move bilaterally, it would just be another, be more money in their pocket, and they'd love it if they could sneak another ally away from, and kind of gain more. I feel like the region in itself, US hegemony has waned massively. The influence has dwindled, and you've got Russia and Iran. I mean, obviously Iran and Saudi aren't going to do business together, but you've got Russia almost as a mediator between these two, especially in the region. And I just think that, if the West does allow its connections with Saudi to drop, which I don't think they will, I don't think they can, but if they did, Russia would just be there to pick up any slack. So
That's right.
As I believe that Russia played very well in Middle East, because if we look at the Turkey was a part of the United States and the United Kingdom. Now that the Turkey support Russia more than United States, and the Russia they tried to come back to return to the Middle East, and they want to create their relation with the GCC and the GCC state and the other countries in the Middle East. So I think that's why they were silent. They just want to not be like other countries. They want to create a good relation with the Saudi Arabia as well, which is the main country in the GCC.
And I'll just put a very quick two-fingered intervention. I mean, look, the Saudis have been talking about drifting eastwards for years, right? Every round table I go to where they tell us, you're not doing enough about Iran. Actually, we're doing plenty on Iran, but they're never happy. As one Saudi once told me, allies are like mothers-in-laws, impossible to please. I said, that's exactly right, sir. And we agreed. We agreed that both sides were impossible to please. The problem is that no matter what we do against Iran, the Saudis don't think it's enough. If we dump loads of defense equipment and build radars and stop the missile defense issues, it's still not enough. Apparently, we should never have invaded Iraq. Of course, I agree with that, but I think if you look at the root of the problem, in 2003 is probably where it began. The Saudis were vehemently against the invasion of Iraq and removing Saddam. As much as they disliked him, at least he wasn't Iran. And we've never really recovered from that point. And the Arab Spring was just another sort of indicator that actually, when Mubarak fell, the Americans didn't step in. Mubarak was kind of Saudi Arabia's good mate. And then we did nothing really to stop, Ben Ali going either. And I think there was a belief that we weren't willing to do enough in the region. But at the same time, we forget, Barack Obama was voted in to get out of the Middle East, not to stay in the Middle East. He was voted in to end 2 wars. One of which he did end, and then they had to go back 2 years later in Iraq, and then the Afghanistan one is still going. So there was a conscientious sort of drive by the Americans to move away from the region and to look further east. And I think that as a result, what you're talking is that there is a sort of systemic waning of American power, and people are filling it. That means Iran, that means Turkey, that means Russia. I agree with you that the Turks are pivoting. I would question whether that was because of things we did. I think Recep Tayyip Erdogan has his own game going on, and it seems like he sort of read The Clash of Civilizations, which said Turkey should be this kind of regional Turkic power, which he's doing very well. Maybe Sam Huntington needs a bonus. But my point is this, is that Turkey's options are not enough that it can totally rely on Russia. Same with Saudi Arabia. Russia can be an actor. It can be one of many actors, and it can be an important one. But there is only one United States. Right, so we see recently that the Russians had just had their the Kuznetsov, which is their carrier, in the dock, and one of the bays sank, and they now can't repair their aircraft carrier. Right, so they have no projection of power in the Eastern Mediterranean. The Americans have 13 carrier groups operational at any one time. The difference in the level of sort of strategic actor is just enormous. And people, I think, overread the Russian role in the region. I agree with you. They pick up any gap that they can see and they can exploit it. My guess is that the preference for the Gulf states and for Erdogan is that the US kind of comes back on side and looks after them. That's my guess.
So, in past, most of the Middle East people said, we believe United Kingdom, and they understand more than other regional powers. I mean, understand from our problem. I mean, Middle East people say that. Now, they said Russia more understand than United Kingdom and United States. So, if you see Russia in everywhere now, in Turkey, in Kurdistan, in Iraq, in GCC states, in a few days ago, the Russia used the president of Tatarstan. He's Muslim. He sent it to, he visited Egypt, and he visited most of the Middle East countries. And they know how they are playing. And as I believe, they will create their relation better than the other powerful countries in the Middle East.
Well, thank you very much for all three of my speakers. I think we have had enough food for thought, and it's only fair to open the space for question and answer. So please introduce yourself and make your question as succinct as possible. And only speak to the mic. So we have two mics, one from the right, and so let's start from this lady in the front. Can we have the mic here, please? And also, please indicate which speaker the question is intended to.
Hi everyone, my name is Rayhan. I'm originally from Kurdistan.
Could you please speak to the mic?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
My name is Rayhan. I'm from the Middle East, and I have a few questions and few comments. First of all, as a Kurdish person, I'm really feeling pain and disappointed by seeing a map of Middle East without mentioning any of Kurdish cities in the map. Like none of a part of the Kurdistan, not north, south, east, and west.
I had this with the Moroccans in Western Sahara once. They got really upset with me because I didn't call Western Sahara Moroccan Sahara.
Like even you mention like important cities, but not like Diyarbakir.
Can we get a question? Is that all right?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a few questions. First of all, I have a question about Kurdistan. What's the ideology of making another border in the Middle East and making a new state? What's the structure? What would be the structure of Kurdistan, the society? Like, is Kurdistan going to make like a capital, like relying on capitalist countries? What do you think about democratic confederalism and democratic modernity in the
I think we
west
got the
of
points. We got the
Kurdistan?
two questions, and both of them are aimed to which speaker?
Sorry, just one more question. And why?
I really want to go and give the chance to other speakers.
Okay.
As well. Is that all right?
Yeah.
So we've got two questions from you, and they were towards Irfan.
Yeah.
Am I right? Okay. Okay. Let's get another one. Maybe the gentleman in the blue jumper.
My name is Brahim. I'm just a member from the public, and thank you, Michael, for not calling Western Sahara Moroccan, because it is not from Morocco, and I am from Western Sahara. So, thanks for doing that.
I got in so much trouble for this, I can't tell you.
Well, you did the right thing. It's sad that you got in trouble for it. I just wanted to ask you specifically about the UAE's short-term strategy in the future, looking at the position that they're in at the moment. Thank you very much.
All right. We will take one last question, and then we go to the second round. The lady in the back as well. She's standing. Please introduce yourself and indicate the question is to which panelist is directed to.
Okay, my name is Roshna Zangana. Just interested in the topic, I'm a student here. The question for Michael, you mentioned you express a concern about KSA on diplomatic level, but what about Iran on security level? Like it's Iran on security level. Like recently, an Iranian agent been arrested by Denmark for terrorist plot. There was Germany arrested a diplomat from Iran embassy in Vienna for planning to bomb a rally in Paris. From my personal experience in Iraq, I used to work with the governor of Diyala, which is the second person after Paul Bremer, CPA North. The Sunni terrorist attack or Sunni terrorist acts, let's say, more naive rather than the Iranian well-planned to have a strategic proxies and planning for long-lasting effect.
I think I get what you're saying. Okay, thanks.
So, do you think the policymakers in UK would have concerns in this time with the Brexit and everything?
Sure, sure.
Okay, let's go for the answers for this round of questions and then we go to the other one.
Okay, thank you, Rehan, for your question. So, as I believe, Kurdish nation is more than 100 years. They did the revolution to get their right, to create their country, to develop peaceful, to create a democracy in the Middle East, because as much like other nations. So that's why they trying to create the state. It's not like that we gonna to change the borders. So Kurd, as I said in past until now, they trying to create the country during the historic. If you go back to the history of Kurdish, I'm sure you are Kurdish, right? You can't see how many revolution the Kurd, Sheikh Saidi Piran, Sheikh Mahmoud Hafizi, Malam Mustafa Barzani, then in Bakur, the Kurdish leader Abdullah Öcalan in Bashur, President Barzani, Mohammad Jalal Talabani, and Qasim Salim, Qasim Qasim Lo in Rosh Halab. So too many leaders, they try to, Muhammad Qazi as well, they try to create the country for our nation. So as I understand, you just ask about that. So democracy in Middle East, as we know, is so difficult to develop it. But Kurds are trying, because 1991, when the Kurds get freedom in south of Kurdistan, so 1992 they tried to do the first election for parliamentary. That time, foreign minister from Iran, Turkey, and Iraq and Syria, they had meeting in Qamishlo. They said how we can let them to do election, to develop democracy, to develop peaceful in north of Iraq, as they say. So, but they did it. Still, they are continuing, as I mentioned in my speech as well. So in September, they did the last election for the Kurdistan parliamentary. So that process, it will be longer. First, now they could have a result for a referendum, and at the beginning they said we're going to hold the referendum. We're not going to declare independence after 25th of September. This is a big process. We're going to do a negotiation with the central government, neighbors, and then with the government to agree whether we get the independence, or maybe next step will be confident.
Well, I think that will also solve the issue of not having a Kurdish city on the map as well. Like, I mean,
that one you should respond to them, because I think
the point is taken. We should have had.
So where are you from, by the way? Which city? Rosh Halat, Kermanshah, part of
Michael, I think you've got some questions to answer as well.
Yeah, the one about UA strategy, great question. because right now the UAE's main boy is in the naughty house, right? Is this difficult for them? But what I would say, and I said this a couple of times today already, so I'll just repeat what I've already been saying, is that the UAE has an ability to affect regional affairs which is actually unrelated to Saudi power. What they quite like is that they have the big strong man behind them with the muscles to do it, but they can do it themselves. Look at what they're doing in Somaliland. Look at what they're doing in Djibouti, Eritrea. Look at what they're doing with Haftar in Libya. And look at how they've basically managed to get complete control of the Bab el-Mandeb because they control Aden as well. And they've done this independently of the Saudis, for want of a better word, because they don't realise that they don't feel that the Saudis can manage it. Right? The Saudi war up in the north is a catastrophe. I mean, it's an absolute embarrassment. And I hope to God, if there's one thing that comes out of the Khashoggi affair, it's that the Saudis bloody put a ceasefire in Yemen, because it's a disgrace. And as the United Kingdom, we really need to put pressure on them to do that. Anyway, going back to your question about strategy, I mean, clearly this is bad, right? This is the guy that for the last, I mean, you go to the UAE right now and they're like stamping, we love Saudi Arabia and the passport next to your visa, right? And you turn on Etisalat, which is the network, and it's like, I love KSA, right? So there's all these things that they're doing to promote, actually at the expense of the GCC, right? At the expense of the 6 GCC countries, and of course you're seeing Oman, Kuwait and Qatar reacting, but this sort of alliance. Now if you're MBZ, Mohammed bin Zayed, who's the sort of Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, I think what you do right now is you keep very quiet, you wait to see where the chips fall, and you wait to see how deleterious this is for Saudi regional policy before you decide where to pick up the slack. But if you're smart, you'll also be making phone calls elsewhere. And what you'll be trying to do is recognise that Erdogan's a bit of a player in the region now, you probably should talk to him. They talked to the Israelis, right? So you had Miri Regev in Abu Dhabi the other day, and you probably want to start talking to the Omanis as well, who are playing their games on the Palestine question. Well, yeah, right. But the Omanis, I mean, think of Iran like a hermetically sealed box. They do their own thing. They don't want to be pro-Saudi. They don't want to be pro-Iran. They don't want to be pro-anybody. And we can talk about Oman if someone wants to talk about it, but it's a complex issue. But if you're UAE, what you'll be doing is you'll be looking for little lanes of activity. And the big problem that they still have is Qatar, right? The big problem is the Ikhwani or the Muslim Brotherhood style policy of Qatar and Turkey that they don't like. They can't do much about it because Qatar, as I said, survived the blockade, so what do? Well, as I said, they play in their games further afield. Look where Turkey and Qatar are in Somalia. They're in Mogadishu, right? And look at Djibouti. You're now looking at the Turks investing there. The Qataris are in Kenya investing in land appropriation there. So are the Saudis. There's a great game going on, a scramble for East African land. So what do I think? Do I think that the UAE is a strategic actor? Recently I said that they are the only actor in the Middle East that have expeditionary capability, i.e. the ability to deploy overseas like a Western power and actually get some result out of it. And they sort of do. I think it would have been better had Mohammed bin Salman not done what he's done and faced the problems that he's faced, because I think Mohammed bin Zayed desperately hoped that Mohammed bin Salman would back him and would be the strong man that helped the UAE realise its goals in the region. Now I think that is in real trouble. So we're still in it's still too soon after the event to see what they'll be doing, but I think it's very clear that there's going to have to be a change and that there's going to have to be a realignment. The question is how they do it and whether they go by themselves. If they do it by themselves, that's interesting. They may not have the manpower to do that. I mean, they are a small country, but they are rich. Right, Iran. I mean, obviously we know what the problems of Iran are. I spend half my time talking about the problems in Iran, and half the time getting lectured by the Gulf Arabs about Iran. So yeah, of course we take this seriously. Of course we take the IRG seriously. Qasem Soleimani is a serious player, and he's been a serious player since 15 years ago. He's someone that we all have to take seriously. I mean, the Kurds learnt, to their expense, how seriously he can play in their region and the effect that he can have. What do I think? Do I think that the way that they structure their security apparatus is better than Saudi? Yeah, I do. And that's something Saudi Arabia is just going to have to deal with and have to learn. Because frankly, if you look at, and I spent a lot of time looking at Syria in 2013, 14, 15, and constantly saying to the Khalijis, look, you keep complaining about the fact that Assad is still in power and that the Iranians are investing all of this time and money in Hezbollah and putting their own guys on the ground and having a look at us as if we're going to do it for you. If you want the result that you want in Syria, you need to do what the Iranians are doing. Why are you not doing it, and why do we have to die so that you have your little sectarian war, right? Now that's the issue that you've got to ask. It's not whether Iran is good, it's why haven't the Gulf states stepped up in that fashion to meet the challenge? They've tried, and they've overreached, which we've seen with Khashoggi, right? So the point is this, is that I absolutely agree, and there's many, many things being done about Iran. Siobhan tells me we're on the record, so I'm not going to go into them. So there are things being done. You know, the post-November 4th moment is really interesting because we'll see what Iran's regional influence looks like once these sanctions really kick in hard. The Iranians are trying to play it off and say that it's not affecting them that badly, that they'll be okay, that, you know, their reliance on oil, which is going to be sanctioned heavily, only accounts for 30% of their budget these days. We'll see, right? But at the end of the day, they were under heavy sanction in 2013, and they were playing their games in Lebanon and Syria and Iraq, as you all know. So, look, you know, here's the issue I want to go back to, is that the balance of power between Saudi Arabia and Iran, I can't see how it doesn't favour Iran at the moment. I think it does. And the question that you then need to ask is, does the West need to get involved in playing that game? And if it does, what can it do without messing up really, really sensitive balances and leaving people in the lurch like the Kurds? I mean, it's a really, really difficult conundrum to get right. But what I will say is this, is that you should read some of the conversations that happened between King Abdullah and General Mattis, when Abdullah basically asked for American troops to go and invade Iran on his behalf. You know, we're not in that game anymore. You know, Iraq didn't go so well, ladies and gents. I know that you guys got yourself a region out of it, but we lost a lot of people, and there's a lot of people in this country that don't really like the war in Iraq, you know, and in America, and it's had repercussions that have lasted for a long, long time. So the region itself needs to work these problems out to a certain extent. The only thing I would say is that the issue in Yemen is one in which we have been directly on the side of the Saudis. We have enabled that war, and there's been no benefit from it other than 1 million people starving and dying of cholera. So if you have an answer, then let me know, because no one else seems to.
All right, let's go for another round. We need to leave the room 5 minutes to 7. So the gentleman at the back, right in the middle, please keep it very brief and to the point, and I would also like the answers to be brief this time.
Hi, my name is Alvin, I'm a third year politics and IR student at SOAS. What I want to know is, obviously, America is pushing quite hard for regime change in Iran. What with the sanctions that are about to come in a few days, and with the creation of the Iran Action Group, coordinating US government action on Iran. But what I don't understand is why, if they're pushing for regime change, why are they supporting MEK, Mujahideen al-Khalq, which I don't think have any realistic prospect of, you know, becoming leaders in Iran.
Who is this question
Just
directed
for
to?
whoever feels
Okay,
like it's
okay.
good for them.
Another one, the lady in the red scarf, right in front of you, please.
Hi, my name's Clara and I'm a member of the public. And my question is for Michael or Jessica. It's basically about international norms and rules. You mentioned about the Khashoggi case and kind of how after the Skripal affair and the international support for the UK after that, it was, you know, a bit insane to flout international laws in such a way. But again, you also mentioned the starvation of 1 million children starving and being killed in Yemen, and where are the international norms there? Likewise, with the Assad regime continually using siege tactics and chemical weapons and widespread use of torture, where are the international norms there? So basically, what is the role of the UN and kind of a rules-based international order today?
Carrying out another question here in the front for this gentleman. Please keep it brief.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Isaac. I'm just a passerby. My question would be if...
But you are a member of the public.
I am. My question is for Mr. Stevens. What do you think the reason MBS gets the boards to do what he does, what he's been doing in the Middle East, is because Trump is in power in the States. I see quite a lot of parallels between what MBS does and what Trump does. Trump just tweets all sorts of stuff and pisses a lot of people off. And MBS does the same with the princes in the courts, and yeah.
We got a question. So would you like to take the lady's question about the international norms?
Sure. I mean, I think the Khashoggi affair has really opened or shed light on exactly what's kind of been going on. We mentioned the Skripal affair, and it's quite interesting. My colleague recently wrote about whether the supposed Russian screw-ups were actually deliberate, whether the Russian actually want the international world, do they want the international community to know that they can kind of operate like this? And yes, it was a totally idiotic thing that was, we're on the record, so I couldn't say for certain whether Mohammed bin Salman was directly involved. I have my ideas, but I don't know whether MBS is watching kind of reaction across the world and thinking, the Russians almost, they did accidentally kill, there's two collateral damage, and then almost killed the Skripals, the target of their, the original target. I don't know whether that it was kind of, they looked at that and thought, well, do you know what, maybe we could just get away with this. This guy's been, I know that Khashoggi was quite close in with the regime, and so I couldn't actually talk to the Saudis' reasons for doing it myself. But certainly, in Syria, back in 2013, the international norms were flouted again and again and again, and there was proof that chemical weapons were being used, and they crossed Obama's red lines, and yet nothing happened. The red lines were crossed again, and we saw chemical weapons being used in Syria in April. Nobody has done anything about it. But again, there's not an appetite, like Mike mentioned. Nobody wants to think about another Iraq, and we're talking about, government formation under someone else but Assad. But how can you effect change if you're unwilling to speak to the person that's actually controlling a lot of the game plan here? And so I think international light has been shed on them. I think the actions we've seen recently will start to change things, and people will be more emotive about it. But actually, at the end of the day, I don't know how people are going to go about enforcing international norms in these situations, to be honest.
Yeah, I think the two questions tie into each other, actually, which, Trump's Twitter account, it violates international norms regularly. And any sense of decency and honesty, I think that we'd all be brought up to believe in. This is a really good question, and you're absolutely right to bring it up. I'm going to say this. I personally think that from at least a Western policy perspective, the Obama administration was so driven on getting the JCPOA, the nuclear deal, done, and Saudi outrage was so high at that time that when Yemen destabilized towards the end of 2014, and then the Houthis came in and basically took everything over early 2015, that it was almost sold to us as the price we had to pay, right? This is the price you have to pay for the region you want to see, in which Iran is back as kind of, out of the cold. What I hope is that after 4 years of a catastrophic war, that has led to all the things that you have said, that the price of this action for MBS is the ending of the era. That's what I hope, because strategically we've been jammed in. And I won't talk into too much detail about this, but I've been in plenty of conversations with people who make decisions on these things, who are frustrated, angry, and understand perfectly well what you're saying, and understand how hypocritical it looks and how difficult this is. But there was this notion that we had to pay a price, right? Saudi Arabia was the great ally in the region who we sold down the river along with Israel although Israel's a nuclear armed state and it can look after itself. But more so, the Gulf states were sold down the line just so that we could get the nuclear deal done with Iran and then bugger off out the region. That was the kind of Obama way of thinking about it. And there were consequences of that. And it comes back to Jess's point about US retrenchment from the region, right? And when the hegemon goes, IR theorists, what happens, right? People fill the space and you get balance of power shifts. That's what happens. So the realist world is very back in fashion, or neorealism, I would say. So, when I was a student, people laughed at neorealism. They thought, oh, this doesn't work. No, actually, it's come back with a force. You start to see things like, guess what? Arms races. That's a neorealist prediction, right? All of these sorts of things driven by the Nash equilibrium and all these stuff that we forgot come back. We even talk about nuclear deterrence nowadays. Goodness me, when I was at uni, we didn't talk about that stuff. It was all passé, right? We were all in the neoliberal. Yeah, we were all like constructivists at the time. Alexander Wendt was the big dude. And now, no, we're not in that. And the region is not in that way. And actually, the game-changing stuff is that you've got leaders of states who behave in this way. That they say interstate competition is where it's at, rather than interstate cooperation. And so, of course, when you get a leader like that, MBS is going to look at him and go, he's not Obama, he's not going to enforce things, I can do this. And, you saw the first one, which is the blockade of Qatar. And I know this because I spoke to people in the UAE that were decision makers who said that there's no way, they wanted to put that in place in 2016. Okay, when Obama was still in power, they knew that it couldn't happen because Obama wouldn't accept it, Kerry wouldn't accept it. When Trump got in, then they saw an opportunity because they felt that the presidency would be on their side, and they'd invested a lot in lobbying campaigns and things that looked and were sending out messages that actually that the US let us handle this. The problem is, I think after a year and a half of let us handle this has led to some disastrous policy decisions from the Saudis, which have been completely counterproductive. And here's the thing, enabled by Trump, but at the end of the day, MBS has to stand up and take responsibility for his own actions. And frankly, it's driven by a bit of hubris, a bit of lack of experience, and I'm not quite sure how you put it in the box. So it comes back to that version of enforcing international norms. If the response is strong enough, then he will stop. But if he feels that it's not been that much, then we'll see more of this behavior, not just from the Saudis, but other states.
Well, thank you. You want to say something about the guy from the back, about the Mujahideen Khalq?
He mentioned that the United States pushing to change the Iran regime. So now, as I know, they started to make Iran weak, to withdraw from the Middle East. But it will start after 3 days, I think. But I don't think so. It will affect because, as I mentioned and colleagues mentioned as well, Iran already created their army. For example, Hashd al-Sha'bi, the member of the Hashd al-Sha'bi in Iraq, 67,000. So how they can withdraw them? And they already in Syria and Alawi, they created their army around 7,000. In Lebanon, Hezbollah as well, they are in power. So it's not easy, as I believe. I hope so Iran become weak because most of the problem in Middle East, Iran is behind. And
We've got a few more minutes. Maybe we can do two more questions.
Just talking about the Shabi, because are they Iraqi or not?
they are Iraqi.
Yeah, they are Iraqi.
They are, you know.
Excuse me, can we have the mic for the gentleman? Because it's better, we have established the protocol, let's do it this way, okay?
Of course.
Yeah, because you mentioned about Hasb al-Shabi, because always you attack Hasb al-Shabi.
Can you make it a question, please?
No, because what I'm saying, because without the Hasb al-Shabi, ISIS, they will take Erbil and Baghdad. Because you see, they stop... According to Masoud Barzani,
Sir, can you make it a question and then we will give it an answer, okay?
No, because you said in Kirkuk, the Shia, they're smuggling oil to Iran. But what about the Kurdish? And you know the Kurdish, because you know Kurdistan is being taken over.
Guys, can we have a question?
Okay, sir.
Kurdish, I'm not going to respond. My colleague.
Have been taken by Taliban and Barzani. And the Kurdish haven't got any right, to say anything.
Point taken. Let's have another question. Maybe from the gentleman towards the left. Yes, let's go by protocol. Yes.
Hi, this is for Michael. Sure. This is for Michael. I'm Nick. I'm from the UK. I'm doing an MSc at King's. This might sound quite blunt and naive, but I'll be really surprised that we have seen this type of behaviour from Mohammed bin Salman. Is this been, in inverted commas and with no disrespect, has this been some sort of like ticking time bomb? You know, we've seen the way Trump's behaved. We've seen the way Putin has, you know, the way Putin's behaved. We've seen the UN pretty much render themselves useless in that respect. The second question is really great. Do you think the relationship between the government?
Give that question to someone else. Can we do that? All right. The lady at the back, please. Neil. And that will be the last question, because we have to leave the room in 5 minutes.
My name's Hannah and I'm an undergrad doing international development. My question is directed towards Michael, just based on what you said about the hot summers in Iraq, and obviously a lot of the refugees currently are conflict-based refugees. If the government doesn't sort of work on the issue with electricity, and obviously with climate change being such a big issue, do you think there could be an issue with environmental refugees?
Yeah. Yes. The climate predictions for the Gulf, Iraq and all the Gulf states are horrific by 2050. You're talking potential temperatures daytime of 60 degrees. Right? It's the highest consumption of electricity per capita in the world in that area. I have no idea how it's going to be solved. I mean, you know, and you've got all these desalination plants running day and night, which is increasing the salinity of the Gulf, you know, X amount of percent and polluting it. I don't know if I'd want to look at the Gulf in 2060, and I don't think it would be a very happy place. Unless things change now. They have to change now. And there are some things being done in all of these countries to try and affect change. The problem is that the little Gulf states are rich and they've got a few amount of citizens. Iraq is quite big and has a lot of citizens, and it's not that rich. So how is it going to be done, and where is the appetite? And it comes back to this sort of waning US interest. You know, we've had all these development conferences and grants and promises of money and $35 billion here and $100 billion to reconstruct Iraq. None of it's been actually given. And when it does, I hate to say it, but I think you guys can back me up, half of it's going to get nicked. So, you know, and that's the problem, is that we can all just sort of talk on the record about it. It's not even sensitive to talk about, right? Like, not anymore. So I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of studies being done about this, and Iraq and Turkey are having a beef at the moment because of the water shortages and these sorts of things. So that's something you might want to look at, is international law.
And can you quickly also allude to the gentleman's question as well?
What was it about? It was Trump MBS. Was I surprised? I don't know. Was I surprised it happened? To be perfectly honest, yes. What happened to Jamal in the way that it did, yes. Because it was so much worse than anything I'd heard before. But yes, people had been disappeared and they'd gone to jail. And, you know, the Saudis over the years have dealt with dissidents. They've gone to jail. You know, every now and then I think some of them have been bumped off over the decades, but it's not been quite like this. And not only that, I was surprised because Jamal has seriously powerful friends in the West and in Turkey, and people that would go out to bat for him. I mean, did MBS really think that, you know, anyone that did my career for any length of time knew Jamal Khashoggi, because you just did. You would see him at events, you would sit next to him and he would talk strategy, you know, going up to policymakers. Every journalist I knew in the region had met Jamal Khashoggi at some point. Everybody was kind of invested in him in a way that there are very few people in the region like that. So the thing is this, I'll be very quick, Siobhan. Every country I've spoken to about the Khashoggi affair has said the same thing to me. We cannot understand why he did it or why he thought it was okay to do it. It comes back to that point, maybe hubris. I'm not Sigmund Freud. I couldn't answer as to what his state of mind was.
You don't think someone...
I'm afraid we gotta leave it there, because we need the last minute to use it to have a short comment from Irfan to this gentleman's question or intervention.
Okay, thank you. Just remind you, at the beginning when Saddam Hussein fell, the only forces to protect Iraq, it was Kurdish Peshmerga. All of Iraq protected by Kurdish Peshmerga. the zone, green zone in Baghdad was protected by Kurdish Peshmerga who leave the Shia leader, Sunni leader, Kurdish leader. So after 2014, the Iraq, the Hashd al-Sha'bi was as a group. Then the parliament recognized it as a rich army. No, it was militia. It was militia, right? So it was.
Was it created?
We're gonna leave it there. We're gonna leave it there. We're gonna leave it there. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. Please give a round of applause to my panel.